I discovered the 8 immortal kings of Sumeria lived a total of 241,200 years. I have discovered through my research that these type of stories have an element of truth to them. Immortality is not only a possibility, but a reality. Could these people still exist in secret? Could they be watching? As there are numerous meanings to the various logos, names, and colors we use. One of the Hermetic principles is that the all is mind, the universe is mental. According to esoteric teachings, survivors of lost ancient civilizations seeded us through the mystery schools. Nearly all our great cosmological myths forming the foundation of the various sacred books of the world are based upon the Atlantean mystery traditions. Never dismiss a story because it is well known that such tales always have an element of truth to them. Have you ever been by yourself and felt like something was watching you from the corner of your room, but when you checked, there was no one else there? That's because we're sharing our space with all different sorts of frequencies and realities that are interacting with us. And even though we might not be able to see them through the visible light spectrum, there's infrared, and of course we're finding out about ultraviolet, where there's all different sorts of other things surrounding us and interacting with us. In fact, what used to be called the talk of quacks and charlatans, talking about dimensions and multiverses, this is now the discussion of mainstream physics. But what about places on the Earth where strange occurrences happen? Like the idea of Skinwalker Ranch, and over in Utah with Blind Frog Ranch, people are seeing UAPs, UFOs, cryptids, and strange phenomena coming out of nowhere, interacting with them in haunted houses, in apparitions. That's why I thought we'd bring on 2 friends of mine who take a scientific approach at investigating these things, and that includes Barry Fitzgerald over in Ireland, and he has over 30 years of doing these investigations. He's been on all 56 episodes of Ghost Hunters International that he led a team for on the American NBC-owned Sci-Fi Network. He's been widely recognized in the paranormal, and his books are incredible. We're also going to talk to Steve Mera, who he works with, and I liken these two as an incredible detective team. In fact, I always tell Steve Mera that he's like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's character, Sherlock Holmes. He even has the tobacco going and all the case files, and they both look at this with such an incredible examination of the historical and the scientific. But Steve Mera is probably the most recognizable figure in the realms of UFO, unexplained paranormal phenomena in the UK. He's got thousands of hours of mainstream alternative TV programs under his belt that he's been on, such as Fright Nights, Origin Unknown, National Geographic's Paranatural, National Geographic's Wild X-Files, Ghost Cases. And when he looks at these things, they both dig in using scientific instruments and so much more. But before we get into today's show, I want to tell you all about these amazing functional mushrooms, such as lion's mane from Neurobuddha, that I take every day to boost memory, to boost focus. They're absolutely amazing. I take them with cordyceps every day with my coffee. And as I've told you guys, I've replaced so many supplements with these. I also take the reishi and chaga, which are fantastic for relaxation and the immune. I get them from neurobuddha.com. And of course, if you guys put in the code ENOC20, you will get 20% off on your next order. And every show I tell you that my place is literally surrounded by pyramids. And I especially love these Orgone pyramids from Light to Light Pyramids, made by Michelle Hood. And they're absolutely incredible. She makes all different types of pyramids. I strongly recommend that you go there and check them out. My first question for you both, and maybe you can answer it first, Barry, is since you have both investigated paranormal occurrences using scientific instruments, you have gathered empirical data, you have looked at the mechanism of action for it, therefore you have identified where it comes from. It's no longer supernatural at this point. It's not unnatural. It operates under the laws of the universe, does it not? So wouldn't it be preternatural?
there is something that we would have to address in regards to natural, because the majority of this phenomena goes back and stretches back into prehistory, back into pre-Mesopotamian times. Now, whether it's caused naturally, that will come under some scrutiny, because there is suggestions there that there is an intelligence behind this. It's not just something that tends to happen with one star meets the alignment of another star and the rising sun and all of this. There's a greater intelligence behind this than what has been given credit. And the problem with that is that when we start delving into our history, we see where there are traces of this phenomena that makes its way up through the ages, but the mask of it changes. The way we interpret it and the way it wishes to be interpreted, it causes a situation in which we're, I suppose, looking at it from a generational perspective, because there isn't so much of a trace of the mask per se in which we interact with it. Rather, the phenomena in which it interacts with us remains the same. It is that we can trace all the way back. Otherwise, we get lost in this generational gap between the two. And sometimes that the energy in which it wishes to be portrayed can change several times in a generation. So again, that can be problematic when you're trying to piece this together. But you know, there are aspects to it which, yes, are natural, but for the majority of times, there is an intelligence behind this, which in itself, I suppose, would be classed as supernatural, because we just don't fully understand it at the moment. And there are laboratories, there are scientists, there are great minds behind this that are starting to strip this away. But just as much as it's being stripped away, there seems to be a new uptake of deception, in which it's continually wreathing and twisting, trying to keep its tracks and secretive in a way.
What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
I totally agree with Barry. I mean, I was unaware initially. I mean, my work in regarding the definitions between preternatural and supernatural phenomena kind of goes back to the early Victorian days and the involvement of what we might refer to as spiritualism, which has led us into paranormal research and then led us into parapsychological studies. As time's gone on, it's been easily identifiable in more current times that there is trends, that there is connections between various different types of reported phenomena from all over the world. It's only when you start to take steps back into, even like what Barry says, before before documented history in some cases, that there has been this thread throughout the years of these interactions. Now, if you look at the details of those encounters, interactions, experiences, incidents, whatever you want to call these things, they don't vary much. What the common thing that does seem to change is how the phenomena presents itself visually in many ways. There is obviously, as Barry said, there seems to be a thread of deception that's involved. And the more you look at it, it's like being a bit of a detective in a sense of speaking. It's the best way I can put it. If you know somebody is committing a certain crime in a certain way, just because they wear a different mask and a different jacket doesn't mean it's a different person. And this is kind of how I saw it. When Barry started going back further in time, I started looking at the more current things, and it still fell into the very same thread, that there is something that is responsible for interacting with humankind that seemingly is changing in its mask, but its procedures and its things it does, it similarly don't change. They just are presented in a different way. And of course, it's very difficult because it's problematic, because as we look at around the world, we've got so many different cultures and different beliefs, and they're all calling it the different things, and they all believe it to be different things. We actually take a tick box and do it and tick off what they were experiencing, and look at the modern time experiences. They're no different. There really is no difference. It's just the fact that how we are perceiving this phenomena, and may that phenomena, if it doesn't become an archetype, that the phenomena might even change again in the future. You know, I mean, because we've kind of the little grey bean seems to be the in thing at the moment. But if you went back to the 1930s, 1920s, it really wasn't. And if you go back further in time, you get into Barry's kind of work, it was certainly wasn't then either. But the thread is seemingly passed right through, and it's still continuing on. So we don't really know, as far as I'm aware, that how long these interactions, with this phenomenon has been going on for. But what I can say is that through Barry's work, there seems to be information there that goes back to, well, as soon as we were able to be able to make marks in the sand to try and relate to an experience, right through today's, like we document now, and more current times, how we experience things seems to be one of the same thing. The difference between, obviously, we're going to talk about preternatural and supernatural, is that we have unfortunately created a system now of compartmentalization. It started kind of creeping in the 1930s, where spiritualism and paranormal things went on one side and everything else kind of through on the other side. And as time's gone on, it's got actually more foundation to that, where you've got metaphysical science, paranormal science, the supernatural. You got your myth and folklore, and you've got your UFO stuff. And when you look at all these things, including the spirituality and beliefs, they really are kind of all one and the same thing. But there's been this compartmentalization so much that the paranormal specialists wouldn't deal with the UFO guys, and the UFO guys wouldn't deal with the paranormal. And it's just been divided. And it's like you're trying to put a jigsaw puzzle together desperately, and you cannot find all the pieces, because those pieces don't lie in the paranormal field. They might lie in a ufological field, or the vice versa. It's only when you start tearing these compartmentalizations down and looking at the subjects as a whole, like phenomenology, then it starts to reveal the trend. And that trend we can find through literally any type of experience that you might refer to as anomalous phenomena.
I think that's a brilliant answer. And I like the fact that you related to this to being like detectives. I've often told you, Steve, that when I think of you like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's character, Sherlock Holmes. I mean, you even have the tobacco going sometimes, and the two of you come together with such a refreshing perspective from an intellectual side, and you're comparing it with science, and you're looking at this from a very logical perspective. And Barry is always bringing in not only to bring the ancient and mythological side, and then you're matching it and pairing it what we have in ufology. And the both of you are an incredible duo at taking this apart. But when we look over at what you were talking about, Steve, you were talking about how we start to pull away from these things. Even if we go back to the 1930s, we start to look down the line. Most certainly the Nazis were looking into things with Maria Orsic and doing experiments. We even have a history that we go back even into the work with Dr. Hal Puthoff and Uri Geller and Ingo Swann and Pat Price and those kind of guys doing remote viewing experiments. I tend to think that at the highest levels of our perhaps militaries or governments, they have a very good understanding of what the likes of Dr. Ivan Sanderson was talking about with vile vortices and where those things go. How far along do you think they are in this sort of research on a higher level? And do you think that it's not only compartmentalized, but do you think it's suppressed and hidden, the discoveries in that world?
A lot of people will sit back and say, "Oh, that's just conspiracy. It's just conspiracy theory that our higher echelon have been involved with trying to communicate with what was beyond the veil." But that's actually not the case. 1968, we have the paperwork from the Douglas Aeronautical Company, who were sponsored by internal money, to use a Ouija board to contact aliens to get advanced engine designs. Now, this is not conspiracy theory. It's black and white. It's there. They were sponsored by the company to do this. And we also see the fallout from that. Whenever I was reading the report, I had a red marker and I'm going through it going, alert, alert, alert. They couldn't see the threats that were appearing with the responses that were coming through the board. And another thing, what the hell is an alien grey coming through a Ouija board?
Yes.
We were always led to believe that the Ouija board was used to communicate with spirits, not real entities that we were led to believe these things were. So again, the alarm bells were going off. And today we see that technological and spiritualistic combination is very much effective today. We see it more than ever. And you know, when Steve and I started working on this, and we started seeing these connections with the positive and negative magnetic geomagnetic anomalies, we could see this pattern start to evolve, in which there was a great weight of technological development which were being applied and dealt with in a particular magnetic anomaly. And this was not by chance. There was an obvious reason for this. And you know, during the development of technology, which has outsurpassed what we even thought technology could do, which includes the tic-tac phenomena, which appeared over in San Diego. That's our technology. It's not something from an alien planet. And you know, a lot of people often talked about the 1.6 gigahertz signal, this very, very strange signal that was appearing whenever these UFOs were coming about. Now, a quick search, and you tend to find that there was a James International Defense Review that was written in 1991. And within that, this particular paper was written for industrial, the defense industry personnel. And they talked about the equipment there, and how this particular equipment was used. It was known as the Beast back in 1991, which has been outsurpassed now. It was a battle engagement arena simulator tracker, and how it looked on the battlefield, and how its signature came back, which we would identify as nothing more than a UFO within the ufological sense. It could process information 7 times faster, and was optimized for 3-dimensional coding. These things could see the battlefield in all areas, and 360 degrees. It was a flying supercomputer, which used a 1.6 gigahertz signal. And the 1.6 gigahertz signal, if we go back and we look at the band frequency, who's using the band frequencies, we find that that's a federal frequency, and is used by military, the military, to communicate with satellites used within and also used by military contractors. The 1.6 gigahertz signal is not alien; it's ours. But that technology was developed within these particular areas where we tend to see a lot of the strange phenomena coming out, but a lot more of the negative phenomena coming out. It's, what is it, 7 out of 10 of the world's top suicide locations appear in these negative anomalies. We've got places here which is drawing people to end their lives in these particular areas. Blood worship. So we're starting to see this over and over and over. And also within the negative anomalies, we also see other ritualistic sites appear within those particular areas that our ancients were using. What were they communicating with, and what was the price?
I have actually heard the same thing, that at a lot of these sites there have been suicides and all kinds of terrible things that have taken place. But you know what's interesting? You mentioned the Ouija board. That's not the first time that Ouija boards have been used in studies. Very famously in Vancouver, Canada, where I'm from originally, they had a very famous study. You guys are probably aware of it. And it was done by UBC. And they discovered that when they blindfolded people and they placed their fingers upon the planchette of the Ouija board, they had what they called, I believe it was the ideomotor effect, that they coined it, that they found this was a very real thing. And I believe Boeing was involved, actually, also, that they looked at how that this could attribute to people being able to discover things that they didn't know. And actually information came to people that they didn't know. whether that was in the subconscious or some other area. It was actually a remarkable study. So the fact that we sell that as a toy, and then we even question its validity of being able to bring answers and things out from other places, that is absolutely amazing. And the fact that you said that there was a communication with a gray alien. Now, Steve, I have a question for you. With everything you just gave us, Barry, that's a lot to think about with that. But extrapolating that further, when we look at this idea that you could have a gray alien communicating through a Ouija board in a study, just like what Barry's talking about, you mentioned a masking. Now, in the areas where you guys are, I don't care if we're talking about going into Ireland or we go into Wales, we go into the UK, we have a great deal of legends and stories of all kinds of encounters people have. And some of the Welsh tales, I'm reminded of the stories of Llewellyn and Rhys. And we have this story about these fairy rings and fairy circles that people go missing in, and these beings show up. And I can't help but think that people going missing, is this like when we go to Wiltshire or something? Is this like when we're talking about crop circles and we have beings showing up? And do you see a connection to the fairy phenomena? And is there a connection with that? Could that be another form of masking? Are we seeing a modern layering of this?
Well, I'll split the answer into two sections. First section, from how she first started, would be about how entities, non-human entities, have been seen or encountered throughout the parapsychological or paranormal circles. Okay, when we talk about those experiments, and of course about obtaining information, it's not the first time. You're absolutely right. It's actually been used probably a lot more than what we can even know, to be honest with you. I mean, we can trace back to the German Metaphysical Society, which became the Vril Society. They were doing exactly the same thing, obtaining information. Though that when from the knowledge, from what I can see of what's been obtained, they're never seemingly given everything. It's like little bits that whet the appetite too, and I think it's the prolongedness and the consistency they want of communication,
Yes.
and that's probably not good for us. But you know, there is some deception, and we can get some really good details and really good facts. But that's only because if they want to give it to us and they want to keep that running for a long length of time, they'll dangle the carrot. It's like dangling the kite in front of the nose. They will never give you the full picture, because you'll take that full picture, go away, and that's the end of that. They don't want that. They want to keep this going. This is also what happened in 1990s, you know, during the skull experiment. You know, there was an infiltration of these non-human entities. And the unfortunate thing of that is that it became so much a common thing that they had to close the circle down. They completely lost control of the circle. Those entities went on to be part of some of the people's lives that are taking place in the experiments. You know, sometimes when the doors open a little bit, it doesn't close. I mean, I've experienced that. Barry's experienced that. Sometimes we get a slap on the hand, in a sense of speaking, as if to say, don't go there, because things will happen. It gives us a clue sometimes as to maybe when you are on the right path.
Are you saying that these entities that you might be investigating in these places, these non-human entities, can follow you around and start to cause?
God, yeah. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they're aware of everything. That's it could be just some typical research that myself and Barry have been doing one particular day, and just by chance, all hell breaks loose for me at night and for Barry at night. And he's in Ireland, I'm in England. You know, I go to contact Barry in the morning, let him know, and he tells me about his experience. And we just kind of know, okay, well, sometimes it's like a slap on the hand. You know, they don't want us to go in certain areas of research and stuff. But the second part of the question is about, you know, traditionally, does this go back and tie in with the Irish legends, Irish folklore and stuff?
Yes,
absolutely. I think Barry can explain that a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. We do see that crossover time and time again. And you know, to give you an example of that, if we look at this new phenomena of cattle mutilation within the ufological field, if we go back 150 years, we find that also in Ireland. In fact, I found it myself back in the 1990s at a location which was famed for fairy phenomena. And to find the animals lying dead and cut in the way that they were that we would recognize as our little gray aliens. But there's a story there within the ancient databases there that speak of a particular farmer up in Leitrim, and he put the cow who had just given birth to the new calf into a barn beside his house. His biggest regret is that he never put an iron shoe over the doorway to protect the two animals. And when he got out the next morning, he found the two animals dead. They were sliced and diced.
Well, why, Barry, why is it? What is with the aversion? Because I've heard that in fairy traditions, for example, and I'm saying this because I knew an Irish lady many years ago, and she practiced what she called fairy shamanism. And she said that when working with fairies, she only used stone, and she refused to have iron around them and all that sort of stuff. And she had all these old Irish traditions, you know, the tween times and everything. What is it about these entities that have an aversion to that? Why is that?
We find this aversion not only within the grey aliens. The greys hate iron, and not a lot of people speak about that. This is my own personal experience. The greys hate iron. The fairy hates iron. The jinn hate iron. The old gods hate iron. There was a connection that we were finding all the way back. This repulsiveness toward iron, and when we go back and we look at the Semitic demons of the incubus and succubus, these two that attack people in their sleep. It's interesting to note that 9 times out of 10 they'll attack women more so than men, but they wait until the women enter their monthly cycle. The women become anemic. The iron is reduced in their system.
That's interesting.
These things prey on the fact that our iron is weak. And there are reasons for that. Of course, there are top secret reasons now, and we can't discuss that until the next book comes out. But we now understand why the aversion for iron is there, but the aversion is there. It does work. And when they materialize into a solid form, they will stay the hell away from anyone who has got a healthy system, or someone who has an iron amulet around them. They will not go near them.
Fascinating. I would like to bring it back just a moment, though, and I want to go and explore something with the two of you. When you briefly touched down, Steve, and I know both of you, sounds like both of you have stories that are interconnected with this, that you mentioned these entities following you home or coming back around you when doing this work, and I have heard of this happening before with people. Is there any stories that you can share with us that stand out that of when this has happened to you? Have they come into your home? Have television sets turned on and off? Have lights flickered? What happened?
Yeah, well, there's quite a number of different things over the years. I can tell you one, probably one more recent one, was myself and Barry were working on some research regarding Sumerian demonology. Because they were visualized as dog-headed, upright walking dog-headed people, in a sense, yes. Speaking as. And they did visual recognitions for that in carvings and stone pots and things like that. So we were doing some research into that, and that evening, I was drawn to go outside and look. And there was something in the sky. This is from my back garden. And he was stationary. He didn't really do anything, to be honest with you. And I got a bit bored and I went in, because I've seen quite a few of those things. And I left it at that. The early hours of the morning, I got up to go to the bathroom. And when I came back, I climbed into bed and something got in behind me and got hold of me, and it was definitely, it was like a male, and it wasn't very nice, and I struggled to get this damn thing off me. And after a while, I did. I was really peed off, to be honest with you, not scared but annoyed. But to have that the same night of having this feeling to go out and see this thing in the sky was just too connected for me to know that yes, there must have been a relationship. I think the following day I talked with Barry to tell him about my experience. And I think before he could even say anything, he said, all hell broke loose at his house. because he said he mentioned light fittings which were pulled out and something was seen. I mean, Barry can tell you, explain that. It was the same night I had my experience. So.
Yeah, it had gained entry to the house and took one of the lights off the wall, and there was clothes that were and towels that were in the hot press that were cast across the floor, and I was the only one in the house that particular night. And there have been other occasions where I had a scientist at the house, and he was about to tell me some of the particular processes that he has gone through to make contact with these lights in the sky. And that's whenever, again, all hell broke loose. They intercepted what he was about to say and start. Now, the walls of the house at that time were 2 feet thick. They were stone walls. These things were beating on the walls on the outside. Meantime, on the inside, my exceptionally large dog was going absolutely berserk at the noises that were distracting the conversation between the two of us. The reason it was doing that is because it did not want me to know the information that he had. And the information was not relayed. But that particular night, whenever he left the house, that night, I had the most restless sleep. And I came down, it must be between 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And I opened the back door to let the dog go out to the bathroom. And as soon as I opened the back door, this beautiful night sky unfolded in front of me, and all of a sudden the star went poof. And I looked at it, tightened my eyes and looked at it, and I thought, two's a doozy. Boom. But three will really, really clinch it. Boom. It gave me three in 3 different locations. Boom, boom, boom. And at that particular moment, because I have a different address for this particular type of phenomenon, and I'll keep it at least decent. I said, come down here and tell me what you want, or piss off. It pissed off, because there is reason for it to keep the illusion alive, and I won't accept the illusion. And this is very, very important when dealing with this phenomena that is coming through the veil in its multifaceted forms. If you suspect at any moment that there's something not quite right, ask the questions for clarity. If it's there for your positive judgments, then it will not have any problem in answering those questions for clarity. But 9 times out of 10, they will piss off. They do not want the lie to be broken.
That's what I think is fascinating about the work that you guys are doing. When we look at Project Doorway and we look at the fact that all around us, that we might think we're staring into a corner of the room where there's nothing there. We think it's just us, that there's all sorts of things we're sharing this space with. Just like when we talk about dark matter, we look up at the sky. Of course, there's other things there and other frequencies moving around all around us. And I've often been a believer in what I call astral wildlife. I think there's all sorts of different multidimensional intelligences out there, very ancient ones that have been observing us. They're all around us. They're interacting with us. People have had different names that they like to call these things, whether it's elementals or some have said archons. So I think there's all sorts of things there, but it's very interesting when we move into the ultraviolet and the infrared, and we now are talking about injecting the eyeballs of mice, I believe was the article I saw, with nanoparticles, so that they could have night vision, and then moving into the infrared and all these different things. So we're not far off from being able to see into these other frequencies and places. And when we look around the world, we get these reports, as you guys have explored in your fascinating research, of these hotspots with strange anomalies. And one place that comes to mind is the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, and these other areas where you hear about all these weird things coming through these portals and strange things. And that whole story, when we see the government involved, military involved, they must know a whole lot more than they're letting on about these sorts of things. And my question for you both, and I'll send this over to you, Steve, is how far off do you think they are from being able to use satellites, let's say, which they can scan everything in our world right now and find us through biorhythms and look in your house and x-ray your house, basically. How far off are they able to use satellites to be able to detect these sorts of places?
Well, we're already doing it. We're already doing it. actually. At the moment, we're utilising a number of satellites to give us data which helps us look at key locations that allows us to be able to do research in those locations to find out if there's a correlation between high strangeness, which is a significant area of research which is usually swept under the carpet when dealing with UFOs and UAP, and these locations. And so that's what we're already currently doing. And it's all about statistics. At the end of the day, we look at when we look at these key locations, we see a marker, and if that marker is present in all the other ones, so what we do is you can take hundreds of the most significant cases around the world, and they will seemingly show the same markers. And when you look at the UAP marker, it's the same marker for cryptid encounters. It's the same marker for paranormal experiences, heightened ones. You know, there seems to be these relationships between the phenomena, rather than, like I was saying before, putting them in these separate boxes, is that they are significantly connected. And when you look down that path, you can say that, okay, well, there are actually people who have multiple types of experiences. People have had the paranormal. People have had UFO encounters, gone home, and then have had a string of paranormal activity or poltergeist infestation. People who have seen cryptids and UFOs, and it becomes very problematic then, because what people tend to do is they tend to put it as a separate experience because of what they've visually seen and documented. But if you take the lid off that and look into what's making that, you'll find connections between them, such as, you know, the infrasonics are often used by not just UFO phenomena, but it's traces in it within the paranormal field, and certainly in the encrypted field. You'll find that there are certain odors connected between the various phenomena. You know, bad smells in paranormal phenomena, pungent smells regarding UFO. You know, bad smells regarding cryptids. You know, there was that sort of connectivity was recognised on the odors years ago, but nobody really kind of put them together, to be honest with you. And as time goes on, and you look at the data, you think, well, hang on a second, we could, if we wanted to, those are locations with profound disappearances. And when you do that, you think, wow, you know, what the hell is going on here? Because it tallies with that as well, you know, and it's crazy. And to prove that, I mean, you can't do it, okay, statistics, you can run your surveys, you can run your check, think, okay, seemingly all seem to be the same. But how do we know for sure? Well, the only way to know for sure is to say, okay, let's do the data, and then we know that this is likely where phenomena is going to be present and manifest. Let's put it to the test. Let's go there. Let's do it. You know, and let's see if the data adds up to the experience, turn it the other way around. And we did, and we did this. This first test was in the desert mountains of Palm Springs, and I think Barry can inform me as to what went on there.
I would love to. I would love to know about that. And Barry, before you answer that, and it sounds like what you guys are using is you're using replicable methods to gather empirical evidence and putting that together, which is very powerful. Because again, in this field, people have often said that this kind of talk was reserved for quacks and charlatans. But now even in our physics and our science, we're talking about dimensions, we're talking about multiverses, all these sorts of things. Barry, before you go on answering that, and also about what you guys discovered in the mountains near Palm Springs, I wanted to know, as you answer this, is there a source that you guys have identified that is responsible for all of this, including what Steve was talking about in Palm Springs, to all the investigations? Do you know where it's coming from? Have you identified that?
We do. You know, obviously since Project Doorway, the work has been ongoing. So years later, yes, we're able now to track and trace, and the finger is pointing toward a particular direction. Again, we can't go into that because there's more research coming out for a book. But we are almost there in saying now we know for sure, and here's the science to back it. And as Steve said in regarding the experiences within Palm Springs, we utilized the satellite data, and we said there's where we want to go. That's the place that we need to be, and we drove the 7 miles up into the high desert, and we were there, and I forget how many people were there, maybe around 10 in 2 or 3 cars had gone up into this area, and we were there minutes, and there was a lot of folks with cameras around, and knowing the phenomena, because this is a global thing. Knowing the phenomena, I knew that it wasn't going to appear with a camera. So I asked everyone to put their cameras away. And it was seconds, when suddenly I was alerted, and I said, they're here. And suddenly above our heads, this light just started boom, 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 boom. Just started, it was like a huge welder's gun was above us, and we stared and looked at it. Now, people that were there, they were an absolute amazement to it. And Steve was there as well. And I remember coming back saying, Steve, well, Steve, do you have an answer for that? And he said, I can tell you what it's not. So this phenomena continued for around 90 seconds and then left. Now, I was still alerted. I knew the phenomena, and I'm well versed with the phenomena. And I said, everyone back in the cars were leaving. And there was some protest as to why. But whenever we got back in the car, I pointed out, when you were having your experience, your fight or flight engaged. Now, excuse me, we know that as the 20-second rule. When the phenomena appears, in whichever form it decides to appear, if it is a threat, your fight or flight will engage. That is your instinct, the seat of your it's the seat of your instinct, your psychic ability, and your gift of discernment is there within the first 20 seconds. If we refuse to listen to that, there is the potential that we will roll past the 20 seconds in which the brain pattern changes into a theta rhythm. That's where we tend to find hypnotic suggestion. That's where we find false memory being enthused. That is also where we tend to find communication with this phenomena also occurs within that particular, the strongest within that brain rhythm. But the deception occurs there, because it wants you to see what it wants you to see. That's why the cameras, they will not appear for the camera. Now, Jacques Vallée gives a perfect example of this. He spoke about this lady, a business lady who was heading from Paris across, heading toward Germany and on the freeway. And all of a sudden, this huge craft, the size of a football field, just dropped down underneath the clouds. And she's driving this Renault Espace with a huge window all the way back, a huge roof window. She throws the phone to the son in the back seat, who's also seeing it, and said, video this. So he's videoing. But what the camera actually showed was this light that dropped out from the star, from the cloud, not this massive piece of craft that she was seeing. That was the conscious connection. That was at the point where they had overridden the 20-second rule. And they were starting to plant what they wanted them to see. A huge majority of the occurrences that we have with this particular type of phenomena is deception.
So you're almost in a trance. And I've explained this to people many times, because I have a background in clinical hypnotherapy, that all of us talking back and forth, our brains are oscillating in beta or hyper beta mode. You read or you're watching television, you're in a light alpha trance. And that's why, someone might walk in the room and it might say, hey, Barry, and you kind of, it has to shake you awake a little bit because you're in a trance watching television. But as we go down, we move into those theta waves, delta, and you most certainly you're going into like a dream state, which is very interesting. Steve, you've talked before with these UFO encounters, these UFO auric fields. and UAP encounters that there's been magnetic disturbances, gravity wells, and time latency or displacement. Yeah. With the UFO UAP phenomena that's out there, how much of that is physical and how much of it might be coming from elsewhere, like non-local, or how do you explain that?
Well, the disturbances in gravitational fields in accordance to UAP studies is not a new one. Probably a new one for us, but it's been going on within circles since the 2000s in you might say secret study programs, which are or black programs in regarding wormhole technologies and stuff like that. Hal Puthoff is actually involved in some of those research programs now. The gravitational anomalies have always been the old stories of how, the magnetic compass would swing and this, that, and the other. However, when you start getting a little bit more in later on in time, you get better equipment, and what we can find is that a lot of these UAPs, I mean, it's the biggest problem is where they're all coming from because of the amount of consistent sightings reported now around the world. Is that, we'd have a superhighway of traffic passing backwards and forwards to Earth. We don't have a superhighway traffic passing backwards and forwards to Earth. We have some anomalies take place, but even the SETI astronomers will say space is unusually quiet, which is quite a profound thing to say. But for them, it is because they're not experiencing. Their biggest question is with all these sightings is, well, you know what? Surely they can't be real because we're not detecting all this traffic passing backwards and forwards to Earth. Well, they don't need, well, that's the biggest problem because a lot of the phenomena is seemingly manifesting. We are seeing phenomena like UAP or UFOs, which will seemingly just appear from nowhere and disappear as in a flash of light, or simply just phase out, as if that they're going from one reality to another. But there are sometimes key locations where they'll manifest. And sometimes when they do so, and there's been a lot of activity, they can affect the given location. And that location can be slightly affected by gravitational disturbances, which are measurable. They can be measured. I mean, we have something now which is a displacement meter, time displacement meter. It's known as a DT meter. It measures any difference in time between the unit and the probe. And there's a good length of distance between them. So it looks for things, the slightest things which shouldn't exist, unless miniature black holes are all around us, which I don't think they are. But we've not only find this in the area of UAP research, where people have suddenly said, well, you know what, a UFO was suddenly appeared in the field we were driving past. What was really strange is the car headlights started to bend toward the object. There was cases through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s. The last case I'm aware of was a place called Cannock Chase in the UK in the 2000s, where people saw an object close to ground and the car headlights that night start to bend towards it. Well, the only thing that's going to drag light waves is gravity, because it's the only thing it can't escape from. Exactly. And it's seemingly a gravity well. Now, what do we have currently to measure that? Well, we have things like DT meter. We didn't have these wonderful gadgets back then. But we don't just have to rely on a DT meter. You can actually see visual effects of bending light just by utilizing a laser fired through a ferrocell. And it's just a lens. And what happens is the light source scatters to the edge of the ferrocell. And if you approach it with a magnet, you'll see the light bend. So we know that, magnetics can bend light, gravitational wells. And sometimes these locations are so active that they leave a residue for a short period of time, which is measurable. Now, when I say it's not just in the UAP phenomena, it also happens in sort of ancient locations. There's places in Ireland where Barry's been, and there's been latency. And you can't explain it, where you should have a time difference between where you are and where the probe is.
First of all, I love how you put that. And that's when we look at these crafts, people think, hey, you got to invent a warp drive or some fast drive. If these guys want to go somewhere, they're going to take time, gravity, and linear proportional distance, and there'll be a transpositioning of it, and they'll be from point A to point B instantaneously, wherever they want to go. And I wanted to ask you, Barry, I was going to say, with these sites that you're talking about, that Steve's been talking about, where this has taken place, you mentioned that there's something that changes there. Something opens up. Maybe it's like the electromagnetic energy. You were mentioning sites in Ireland that are like this that Barry had looked into. And most certainly in Egypt, there's places like the Serapeum or underneath the Great Pyramid that there's such intense electromagnetic energy there that your hotel keys are demagnetized. When you go back to the hotel, it doesn't work. Barry, I was going to ask you, with these sites that have sort of been activated, is there, would you say that is it a string of nothing but good encounters there, or nothing but bad encounters, or is it balanced? Is there, how does that work out after there? Do people have lots of positive encounters with entities or beings there if there's been a sighting?
There are places like that, and places that are still utilized for that particular purpose, to commune with what is coming through from beyond the veil. The idea of these being nuts and bolts craft, we have to keep in mind, and this is imperative that we keep in mind, anything can be created from beyond. We see this within the seance rooms, that even in the Skull experiments, small UFOs appeared within the seance room that produced a little beam of light onto the table, that flew through the table. And all of this phenomena was happening. In fact, the gray alien appeared and was recorded within that, and the alien became known as Blue. This phenomena was appearing in the seance room. But not only that, there was a sitter that we were speaking to and we were friendly with, who was sitting during one of the seances when someone grabbed his hand. He then followed with his other hand, their hand up to the elbow, in which there was nothing after that. Anything can be materialized. We shouldn't lose sight of this particular effect. And in fact, what was happening in the Skull experiments was a play on us, because we were told, well, nothing was going to appear within bright light. It has to be dark, almost darkness, maybe a little red light, something that we can maybe see something. And this was a play on us, because 20 years before, the same bloody phenomena appeared in the Livermore laboratories in the United States in broad daylight to the scientists. The phenomena was tracking them back. And the problem here is that the more and the longer that we try and reach the phenomena, the deeper the connection that is made. It is imperative that it makes a connection with us. And if we continually go back more and more and more, the phenomena gets a deeper connection to us, a hold, if you like. And that was very evident in the Livermore laboratories, because the scientists there thought they were going crazy, because these strange animals were appearing in their rooms. One arm appeared with a hook on the end of it in one of the hotel rooms, and it moved itself around as if showing off that, look what I can do, and then dematerialized. Now, this phenomenon was happening in broad daylight. Those rules are changed, not for them, but for us, to make it difficult for us to question what's going on.
That's incredible. Barry, you know what I think of when I think of the parts where you're at, and this is all over the world, but when I think of Ireland, which is one of my favorite and most beautiful places in the world, you think about the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, who arrived on flying ships and all these mystical and incredible places. But probably one of the most extraordinary places you can visit when you go to Ireland is Newgrange. And so when you go to Newgrange in these places, you go in there and there's this solar alignment that comes through. What is it? The 22nd, 23rd, or 23rd, 24th, and then there's a realignment, just like the old winter solstice ideas. We see that in Karnak. We see that all around the world, even in the Yucatan. We see these equinox alignments and whatnot. And I wanted to ask, well, I asked you the question too, but I wanted to ask this of Steve. Do you guys see that there are any activations of these places at either like what the old Irish fairy tales used to talk about, the tween times, which you could have an encounter, or also even at these certain times of the year? We just went through Samhain when the supposedly the trooping fairies are coming out, and there's these encounters that could kind of take place. Because I want to tell you this before you answer this, Steve, that when I'm in Egypt and we see places that refer to what is called a stargate, and I'll be there with Muhammad, or we're outside of Karnak or one of these places, he says, don't you know that there's a certain alignment that has to be used with sound, because there's a certain harmonic aspect to our universe of different resonance and all that, but the light has to align at a certain time to hit the door and come down through a certain place, even outside of Hatshepsut's mortuary. Steve, do you see times of the year and day, does that affect the energy of these places?
It's a really good question, actually. And it's a lot of people where they don't really get to explore. They kind of run around the rims of it. But we always knew there had to be more to it than just basically the aspects of a resonant chamber, the aspects of just producing and on the right type of frequency. Some of those frequencies are not attainable anymore because some of them are tuned to the location at a time when we had better vocal cords. Some of them are, if we take in India, for an example, the Gurudra mantra. I mean, they say that it used to take roughly 30 years to practice to actually even create a Gurudra mantra, and that's the frequency that's taking place in those locations. The second aspect of that is what we might refer to as a double lock system, where there is a terahertz frequency of light. And our terahertz, if you got through our research, you'll find out that this terahertz frequency of light keeps turning up time and time again, and not just in relation to ancient sites, but also to the UAP phenomena, auric fields. Some of the studies done regarding Hasdallen, the light phenomena, which scientists have just recently stated, which I've seen, is that that the light phenomena is now firing beams of lasers lights down to the ground as well. So it's taking us in a different direction, completely more to the UAP phenomena. And now we're also aware that there is also not just the UAPs is a big name. Some of them are seemingly structured craft. Some of them seem to be intelligent light forms, which are interacting. They seem to be intelligent, interacting, but in a non-physical sense. They're not physical in nature yet. They seem to be. So there's multiple different things. But when we talk about the double lock system, it's like the utilization of light frequency and vocal frequency in an area where it's attuned to activate. Now, I know we've done some tests and things in numerous different locations. I've been on locations with Barry and Island where I've heard the voices from the other side, the veil, wow. and I had to be there at a given time, running up on top of a muddy mountain, carrying all my science gear, and Barry ahead of me saying, "Come on, Steve, we've got to get there by the time the sun sets." Thinking to myself, why is it so important about the sunset? Everything is about timing. Barry will tell you, we even recorded those voices, which I cannot understand the language. But it's on the opposite. This is to be a granite wall, and they come from the opposite side of it. But Barry will tell you more about that. But he may also be able to tell you about a bit more about the studies in what we've done in regarding those double lock systems and how you can even be in those locations with equipment and record things that are, and capture things audibly, which are not being produced from our side, from the other side. And Barry can tell you more about that.
From our side, it's important that we understand that those particular chambers were built for a particular time within the year. They just weren't to be used willy-nilly anytime. The people who came after the original builders were left inheriting these stone structures. They didn't know what the hell they were for. And then they incorporated them into their belief systems, and that kept rolling and rolling and rolling. There was a gap, an archaeological gap between the people who built the passage chambers and those that came after, the Tuatha De Danann, as you refer to them. I see them as being nothing more than people from the East who come in and brought warcraft with them into Ireland at that particular time. And it was noted as well, there's some controversial archaeological evidence there that suggests that the people that did come in during that particular period wiped out the Neolithic male lineage. Now that destroyed that line instantly. So they wiped out that particular part of history. But interestingly, when I was in one of the chambers, and I should point out that our chambers were built before the Great Pyramids of Giza, and these particular chambers, when I was in one, for instance, at the summer solstice, people lose sight of the fact that yes, the solstice falls on the 21st, but it's a 7-day event.
Yeah.
The light will penetrate the chamber over 7 days. It becomes potent, yes, on the 21st. That's its peak, is the 21st, but you have a window. So up until now, you've got people who will fight blood and nails to get into these chambers on the 21st of June. Why? You've got 7 days. But anyway, setting that aside, I ended up going to one of the chambers. There was no one else on the mountain because they had all left several days before. And I set in the recording equipment to record the sun entering the chamber. That was the primary reason to be there. I just happened to leave the recorder running as well, the audio recorder, not quite sure why, and left. I went up onto the top chamber. I was there for 3/4 of an hour, and I came down, reviewed the footage, got what I needed, and came back to the office. I started processing that particular footage. And interestingly, as I was watching, I thought, I must listen to the audio. The information in the audio was superb, because as I had left and was gone, there was no one else on that mountain. I started to hear these huge pillar stones that hold up the roof change and turn and grind in position.
Good God.
I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? As the sun began to enter the chamber, and there's a reason for that. The sun, there was a particular frequency of the sun which is filtered by the atmosphere at that time. There's a key terahertz frequency which is exceptionally important and must be understood. Those doorways were opened to something on the other side, and it was not meant to be done any other time.
It makes sense, Barry. And I'm reminded of, in the Indiana Jones movies, what was it, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he's supposed to be, what was it, in Tanis, but it's not really in Tanis where he is, but he's holding the staff and the sun comes down at that certain beam and unlocks things and shows him. Well, I want to bring it back over to Ireland for a moment there, because you mentioned something interesting, because when we look at that history of Ireland, and I truly believe that researchers such as yourself have dug a lot deeper than even our common historical accounts. We talk about the Minetians and others, but there was the Fir Bolg there, right? And the Fir Bolg, if I remember right, correctly, it was my friend David Halpin over in Wicklow that had pointed this out to me, translates, I believe, to men with bags. And
bagmen, that's great. Yeah.
What's very interesting is that we find these men with bags portrayed all over the world. Whether you go in to the Akkadians, the Etruscans, the Phoenician Canaanites, we find them all over the world, that there's these fellows with bags, sometimes what looks like in the Assyrian area. Even if you go over into the British Museum, you'll see it looks like either a pine cone, which some argue, could that be like the pineal gland, or is it a date palm, as Andrew Goff has said, a date. There's all kinds of different interpretations of this. Do you suppose that those folks that seem to be either Atlantean missionaries or something going all over the world, do you suppose that them being in Ireland, they held the great secrets of the ancient world, the prehistoric world?
I don't believe so. The bagmen, I think, from what I'm led to believe in the new research, suggests that they were escaped slaves from Greece.
Oh, fascinating. So they're not the same. They're not the same men with bags potentially that we saw all over the world.
No. And what we see through the DNA analysis is that the people who were building the passage chambers originated within the Fertile Crescent.
Incredible.
They were coming across, and we don't only find those passage chambers in Ireland. We also find them in Scotland, in England, all around the Nordic countries, and they were seen also as particular doorways, almost representing ancestral worship, in a way. But it also ties into a lot of the research that was coming out of Mesopotamia at the time.
Do you suppose, because I know that you guys have connections in there that you can't get into today because you're working on all sorts of new research, but there's all sorts of fascinating connections that both of you have made to the ancient world and connecting it to Ireland. And I do still strongly believe that Ireland is a very, very important piece of the puzzle in the world, with connections to Egypt, in fact, major connections. A friend of mine who is, again, I mentioned him, is a researcher out in Wicklow. Hello, David Halpin, if you're watching. He has studied the stone circles around Ireland. He has a study called Circle Stories, he calls it. And up in Wicklow, of course, we've been to a few places there, but he went up into, I believe it's called Bolton Glass Hill. And these areas, I think the other place is Baltic-Carrigan Hill, or one of those areas. He said that he has found an exact replica of the circle that we find over in Naphtali in Egypt, that's now at the Nubian Museum. He said it's in Ireland, an exact replica that we'd find. And whether these are archeo sort of calendars, I guess sort of like the 900 megalithic henges we find up near where you are, Steve, going up from Stonehenge and these places, and Avebury moving upwards. Is there a connection then, you think, to Ireland and these ancient places of power, that whoever went there building circles and going around with these sacred sites, do you think there's a connection that extends all throughout the ancient world? Was Ireland perhaps a part of Atlantis?
I don't believe it was part of Atlantis, but we do have a connection to the ancient world, that's for sure. I think that is pretty much concreted in now. The Egyptian connection, yes, has a perspective there, but I think our primary connection was definitely the Fertile Crescent. That's where a lot of our primary archaeological history seems to be coming from. We find that in particular the mound builders, which is exactly what we're looking at with the passage chamber. It is this mound, and we find that the mound builders also within pre-Mesopotamian times, the Ubidian culture, were prolific mound builders, but we don't know anything about them.
Well, I want to ask you this, and I want to ask both of you this, but I'll start with you right now, Barry, since I still have you on the subject. Where I live in Budapest, Hungary, I'm fascinated by the fact that when I talk to people and I ask them, have you had a haunted house? Do you see ghosts? They just don't have those sort of experiences with those encounters as you will in Ireland or in the UK where you are, Steve. It's not at the same rate. And I'm wondering, is it not reported? B, is it because it's such a Christian country that they have strong beliefs that they're just not acknowledging it when they're having these encounters? It's not that it hasn't happened, because I have heard the odd case, but it's not as prolific. And I wonder, what is this case with these different places of power and supernatural areas, since you guys measure it? Why are they so abundant in those parts?
Well, I think, in any place, like you mentioned, that certain things don't happen in certain key areas. I think if the belief was there, then the phenomenon would present itself in that manner.
Fascinating.
It's as simple as that sometimes. I think, it's proven many times, that just because the belief in something brings about the creation. I mean, you only got to look at the Philippes moment for an example. The creation and manifestation of a ghost through the process of belief. And it worked. I mean, people believed that they could create a ghost, and the investigation and the experiment was a success. It took place in Canada, the Philippes experiment. And there are further studies that can confirm that. The process of that type of meditation and thinking about creating topias or bringing to life something can happen around the seance table. You have literal physical manifestation take place. It's happened. I've actually seen physical manifestation. It can happen within the meditation circles. I mean, if we say, the manifestation of an item that appears during a seance, and the manifestation of a UFO seen during the sky during a meditation session, is really not much different. I mean, we can say, okay, well, we can look at you can look at C5 operations, C5 protocol, and say, okay, if we get a gathering of people and get them all thinking the same thing and try and get something to manifest in the sky, there is a possibility it can do. And yes, it can do, because it happens around the seance table. I mean, everything leads back. You should further back you go, the UFO stuff starts to disappear. First manifestations of non-human entities around the seance table. That should be the clue as to where we should be heading. It's only because through the process of belief systems and how television has guided our science fiction ideas, that now we think that there's over 2,000, 3,000 different varied entities coming from 2,000 or 3,000 different planets, which seemingly are all bipedal, which seemingly all want the same things, seemingly have the same craft. I mean, you know what, if you were to write statistically that down and give it to anybody who's a detective, who's going to turn around and say, no, leading research into artificial intelligence now, AI computers, which don't have a dog in the race, they don't have a belief system. You plow all this information into these computers and it starts kicking out information such as the source. It finds so much connectivity between all these things that computers think it's one thing. The AI thinks it's a source with the capabilities of creating physiological constructs. That's exactly what we're actually talking about, myself and Barry, about how this can present itself, a phenomena which is the source, as the AI refer to, because it doesn't have a belief system. You take anybody off the street and ask them, they'll have a belief system. So, that's how it sees it, because there's so much connectivity between all the various phenomena that's taking place all around the world that it thinks it's the same source. So when we talk about these things, like you're saying, is the key locations and how we manage to go to those locations and witness things and carry out research at those things, at those locations, are crazy. I mean, Barry's even had recordings of drumbeat, and they're not coming from our side, they're coming from another side.
If I understand you correctly, and I have a question for you, Barry, wrapping this up based on what you just said, Steve. If I understand you correctly, this is like the observable effect with Schrodinger's dictum or the double slit experiment, that it's like that quantum physics principle that the relation of objects is as real as the objects themselves. So we are going to give an interpretation based on the lens that we have in our belief system. And I guess in a place like Ireland or a place like Hungary or a place like Japan, you're going to have a different way of seeing these things. And by the way, there's a huge UFO interest here. People do see UFOs, they see all that sort of stuff and that phenomenon, but it's going to be different. Would you say, Barry, based on what your experiences are then, looking at these cases that you guys have examined, that does a religious person that it might have a Catholic background, or let's say they have a Protestant background, whatever it is, which, by the way, in Northern Ireland is a whole different discussion. But I was going to say, does that change the way that they perceive these things, and can it protect the individual?
No, it doesn't. And the way that we perceive it has a slight influence on the way it wishes to be perceived. That's why the cameras don't work. And I have been on a location when they have appeared in front of me, and there have been two individuals, but my camera only captured one. That's whenever I knew that they can interfere with the way they wish to be, or we can interfere with the way they wish to be perceived. And that's by use of camera. If they suspect that there's a camera there, if they tap into your intelligence, and we're going right into a conscious connection here, if they tap in that there's something there, they won't appear. They're gone. But there are particular processes in which we can engage that can remove that particular piece of the problem, in which cameras can be useful at location, providing there's particular processes engaged to do that. And that's why we also seen that feeling within Skinwalker Ranch. They put up the cameras, the conscious connection was already established.
In blind
They knew exactly what they were doing ahead of time, before they even thought expressing that. It was already in their thoughts. It had picked up on it. So we have to engage this phenomena slightly differently. And again, it comes back to the point of make sure you know what you're dealing with, because if you have any suspicion whatsoever, ask your questions, and it will not mind a few questions for clarity. At least it shouldn't.
That's truly incredible. I want to ask you guys, would you be willing to come back and do a Project Doorway series where we could explore some more of these encounters of not only these non-human entities, but these places? Could I get you guys to come back?
I'm sure we can.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a very rich amount of research, and because it varies all over the world. We know about the phenomenon, how it's utilized, it's tracked. I mean, just an example: thousands and thousands of people from Ireland were taken over to Seattle when the cities were and houses were being constructed. They were brought in to completely clear the land, and it was those folk, unfortunately, who ended up in skirmishes with Native Americans. But what came with them was the phenomena, the fairies, and all those Irish traditions. They came with them. And if you go to the places in Seattle, the people will tell you that they have the same experiences as if it was in Ireland. And this is like I was saying before. It's down to if you believe something in a given era, I'm sure it'll end up manifesting so. And like what Barry said earlier, the longer consistency you have with this phenomena, the deeper it gets. It's true. It really does. And I think there are people now quite willing to express that maybe they wish they hadn't had so much involvement in some of those experiments. And I can certainly tell you one person, that would be Robert Bigelow. He came out a couple of years ago during an interview with George Knapp, talking about the experiments with this source, which was so deceptive and playing games. But because of the consistency, there was a sting in its tail. That sting in the tail left a very long problems with certain people, a number of the NITS teams, certainly Bigelow himself, regarding a consistent amount of negative things happening in his life, just real problem after problem after problem. And he actually stated, realized that that was the key, because it affected other people, which had also been consistent, long and consistent experiments with the phenomena. And sometimes it's the important thing is that investigating it the right way, and also, I mean, it's not all love and light, and sometimes people like to think it is, but it isn't. And there are warnings about certain procedures and how far you actually take that step. You have to do it in measurable chunks, I would assume, and try and keep your head as best you can under radar.
Steve, I have one last question I'd like to ask to both of you, and before we wrap things up today, but I want to ask you guys, as someone who has looked at the esoteric and the occult for many years, and all levels. Okay, so all sorts of traditions we have that people have said throughout history. They've called things demons, incubus, succubus, jinn, all kinds of beings that they've encountered. And of course, you're familiar with movies like The Conjuring and stories like that, where we see these things come at people and they lunge at them, attack them, or drain their energy, and perhaps take this loose from them or their energy by inciting some kind of fear. There's obviously intelligences there. And of course, you go back traditionally into these different systems, like you'll hear about with the Goetia. And the Goetia will have these, you'll have these 72 demons, they call it, which of course they get their names from the Shamham-Farash and all these sort of places that they call on them. And the magician would traditionally stand in a magic circle and would command them to do his bidding, to give them help and to call on them. And obviously there's intelligences here. Do you suppose that what has been called familiars and whatnot in the Bible, do you suppose that there are people who have used these ancient systems that even go back to the witch Endor in the Bible? Do you suppose that they've used these systems to call on these intelligences and get information from them, or to get help from them? Have they found a way to communicate with them in a way that has been helpful to them? And if so, what were the consequences, if any?
Well, I think Barry can answer. But the only thing I can mention on that is very briefly is when dealing with the phenomena in general, it has its own agenda. And sometimes that doesn't end well for humanity. Sometimes the deception is so much to whisper about invasions, and encourage war and death, and that is seemingly been present through ancient times.
Because Steve, I agree with you, but it's like an ancient technology. If you look at how a person that does evocation works, and I've read all kinds of books of every level on the esoteric over the years, but you have to have certain types of gold and conductive metals there. It has to be done at certain times of the day, or certain days of the week. So we have the importance of time and all that coming in. There's certain sorts of fragrances, and maybe that we change the harmonic resonance in the room.
Yeah, there's certainly a part of ancient alchemy which runs deep. But you know what? All you got to go back to is the Masonic and Templar, which are very, very associated so much in ancient days with the alchemy side of things and communications and stuff. I mean, traditionally, from the Irish folklore, Barry will know better than I would about, how far that goes back, and are there people that utilize this? I'm sure the phenomena utilizes it.
Fascinating. Barry, any final thoughts on that?
Yes, there is historical context there for that communication having been established. In fact, our kings and high priests attended these places so that they could acquire information from, I suppose, the way that it portrayed itself back in the day was serpents. So the wisdom of the serpent was relayed through the oracle. And this has been going on for centuries. And in fact, in some places, it's still going on. There's an island here in Ireland, I call it the Island of the Dead, and that's the place where we discovered this doorway to the other place where there is a discrepancy in time. And it was an island that gave me so much terror, I have to say, in my initial encounter, that I swore I never wanted to deal with that again. This was one of these core places that you came to commune and gain wisdom from the other side, but that wisdom came at a price. And as Steve rightly pointed out, that usually tended to fall onto bloodletting and huge amounts of blood loss. And if we look at the appearance of the shining ones, what is, yes, religion, of course, converts it to Mother Mary and all the rest, these apparitions that appear and give these wonderful messages. That 10 years before major outbreaks of war over the last century, they were on the go with every war. They were appearing. And if we go back and we look at, for instance, Lourdes, about what was going on there, when Bridget initially seen the entity appear from the cave, again, we're back to the rocks. When it appeared from the cave, she didn't know what the hell it was. In her initial notes, she referred to it as that thing. But it was man later that overrode that and now became Our Lady. She never recognized that. In fact, her instinct was telling her, get the hell away from it. And now we're worshipping it.
Yeah.
We need to be very careful about what we're doing and what we're calling in.
I want to thank you both for the fascinating conversation and coming on the show today. And I do look forward to us continuing this Project Doorway series. And if anyone listening wants to find these two brilliant men, Barry Fitzgerald and Steve Mera, there's going to be links down below where you can go to their web pages, follow them on social media, and buy their books. And please, we want to grow our audience. So I'm going to ask you to like, subscribe, comment, share this video with your friends, and I'll talk to you all soon.